with the trains, because you talk about it when you have visitors come here to the depot about the 8 trains that you would have, passenger trains now, that would come through these mountains. At its peak, Asheville was the crossroads for part of Southern system. And the crossroads would go from Charleston all the way to Cincinnati through Asheville. And going west, many of the trains would end up in Atlanta because they'd go to Murphy, and they would connect in Murphy with the old L&N and go into to Atlanta from that direction. Coming from the east, obviously, most of the trains that were coming down from New York, Washington, would come down through Salisbury, and then Salisbury west to Asheville. But it was an important crossroads in this. And the famous Carolina Special, I wanted to see, I had a note that I wanted to share with you, one thing about it. I guess what it was, Asheville became just a real hub and center, as did all the communities that were along the railroad to and through that city. Now, we had the passenger service continue. Let me just go over here, back up here. Yeah. Passenger service was completed from Spartanburg to Asheville in what year? If this you don't know, I'm going to have to spank you. Close. Add 2 more years. 85. The line was completed. This was the first line to crest the mountains, as you know. And in July of 1878, you had the first passenger train chug in here. But they were short of money. They were always short of money. This was private investors that contracted with the state for convict laborers as well as others. But they finally, when the North Carolina legislature threatened to revoke the charter for the, up here they called the Asheville-Spartanburg line. Down there in South Carolina it was the Spartanburg-Asheville line. Anyway, when they threatened to revoke the charter, and the state would provided some additional convict laborers to complete it, they completed the line from Spartanburg to Asheville in 1885. So that's coming up from the south. Coming from the west, the east, that was the first date of completion of the railroad. That was finished in October of 1880, when the first train chugged into Asheville coming from the east. Going north and west through Marshall on over to Newport, Tennessee, that was completed in 1882. And the last freight and passenger link to the west out to Murphy, goes out through Silva, Bryson City, Andrews to Murphy, that was completed in 1891. And there was less enthusiasm for it. The state of North Carolina had sold the line in 1880, and again, if you start doing financial deals, and William Best, who bought the railroad and then sold it within 6 months, and that would be a story in its own right that we haven't time to go through here. But we've got, you see Asheville as the historical crossroads, and I guess the thing that then the other thing I need to use this map to tell you, remember when the last passenger train ran through here?
December 6th, 1968.
Yes, December of 1968 was the last passenger train coming in from the south. So it came through Saluda on into Asheville. This wasn't the last one. The first cessation of passenger service was between Murphy and Asheville, and that was in 1948. So right after World War II, the people were returning to cars, and this was not. And if you'd ride on the Great Smoky Mountain Railway, because the Murphy line in part is the Great Smoky Mountain Railway, 67 miles of it. it twists, it turns, 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. It's not a fast and efficient way to get from Murphy to Asheville. So that closed down in 48, 68 in the line south of here, and Asheville to Salisbury was the last passenger service, and that closed down in 1975. So what's been going on since then? Well, we've been working, a number of us, to get the Varnish. And by the way, here's your term. If you don't know rail term, when they talk about the Varnish, and you'll hear, by the way, on radio dispatchers for the railroad talk about, we're holding for the Varnish at milepost such and such. What's the Varnish? Passenger train. That's exactly their term for it. And it comes out of the days when, going back to the late 1800s, when wooden coaches were what the passenger cars were made of, and they varnished them. And so the term, the Varnish, but it's still in use. You'll hear radio dispatchers and the railroads use that term today. And it's, so if nothing else, you learned a term if you didn't know it from here. So in the 1990s, the Asheville Chamber of Commerce was ginning up a lot of support for the restoration of passenger rail service to Asheville, and they wanted it to run for the line between Salisbury and Asheville. Now I'm going to tell you a story that I shared just a few minutes ago out here, and it's the line that was used. And if anybody was around at that time, you heard it. The line that was used as the most frequently requested destination unserved by Amtrak was Asheville. I heard that from the time I moved here in 1978, I think. That's the first time I heard that. Chamber of Commerce used it. And I had a chance to meet with the president of Amtrak when I was in the legislature in 2009, I guess it was 2010, I guess. And we had a meeting because he was taking a tour of the Amtrak system, and he stopped in Raleigh. And I met with him at their attorney's office in Raleigh, and I was ready. I had all the data that we had compiled, and I'll share some of it in a minute. And I was ready for him, but my lead line was, and Asheville is the most frequently requested destination unserved by your railroad. And he said, Representative, we've heard that for years, but none of our agents can. We went through our computer records, and we have nothing that even suggests that. And he was very gracious about it. He wasn't in your face about it. He was just saying, we have no data to support that. Well, I have to tell you, folks, I was crestfallen because that was my lead. I thought, here we go. This is going to be. Well, we had a wonderful conversation. And what he did share is, if the North Carolina Rail Division and the state of North Carolina wants to fund that service, we'll support it. And that's a different story. And thank you. I left my drink in the car. Thank you so much. That was a little. So I was a little crestfallen, but that was what I was involved with was part of a widespread effort led at that point in the 90s by the Asheville Chamber of Commerce. They had a special rail committee. Some of you have come in contact maybe with Judy Ray, who was the head of the committee that was just, every time there was a legislative session or rail service was discussed in Raleigh, Judy was in her car. She would drive to Raleigh and be ready to testify and advocate for passenger rail restoration. Finally, in 1994, the legislature ordered the North Carolina DOT Rail Division to do a feasibility study and to find out just that. Is it feasible to have passenger service connecting in Salisbury Salisbury to Asheville. That was the line DOT said was the preferred line they wanted. And in 1997, the route was recommended. That was kind of set up, to be honest with you, because DOT had signaled that that's what they were interested in, that extension of the old Western North Carolina rail line through Salisbury. It's a little bit more difficult. Well, I won't go into this. The Saluda grade is a challenge, and they didn't want, frankly, they talked about it, they didn't want passenger trains on a grade that's 5%, period. You know, I mean, it was for them, and if you were to talk about those folks from the time, for them it was a safety issue, you know, and so that being said, talking about a safety issue, very nice timing. Thank you, Judy. Did you arrange for the? Good. That's good. Well. So the 139-mile line from Salisbury to Asheville, which goes through Statesville, Morganton, on through Marion, Old Fort, up the mountain, Black Mountain, into Asheville. That's been the focus of most of the efforts since then. Now, with 1999, there was a Western North Carolina Rail Corridor Task Force. This is the old Asheville Chamber of Commerce Rail Committee, or Transportation Committee, is what it was. It was, broadly speaking, trucking was involved as well. But this was a task force that was set up to focus specifically on rail. The legislative representatives out this way got behind it. They authorized the Wake Forest University Babcock School to do a study. And their projection was, now this was not contested in any way when I met with Amtrak's president, 72,000 passengers is what they projected would ride the rail between, making the connection to Asheville. 72,000. I thought that was a pretty good number. I really did. And I was very sincere when I was talking to the Amtrak president, and he said to me, Representative, I see that, and I think, we have great respect for the study that the Babcock School did. When you can get that number to 240,000, we'll talk. I left that meeting not in the best frame of mind. I gotta tell you, that was tough. But that we were undaunted, and but at that. Now remember, I was talking to him in 2010. This was back in 2001, and so we had the Babcock study. There were some issues with that, and I don't want to get sidetracked, no pun intended. But the initial study they did was really silly. I mean, I read it for one reason. Their methodology was, they stopped every 10th car at the foot of the mountain near Old Fort on Interstate 40. And they asked, if there were train service to Asheville, would you take it? Well, oh yeah, we'd take it, sure, They didn't ask one follow-up question. When's the last time you ever set foot on a train anywhere? But in any event, there were other methodological issues with it. But they did another follow-up study 2 years later. They came up with the same number, but it was a much more legitimate. The data they used was much more sound. Well, then in 2001, rather, the legislature authorized an engineering study. Because remember, you got to go up those Old Fort loops to get to Asheville using the Salisbury to Asheville loop. And they needed to see what kind of money it would cost. $2,001. That's 20 years ago now, right? $134,700,000 to institute the service. That's upgrading the rail for safety standards, obviously, as well as upgrading stations along the route because they would have to be upgraded. And I have to say this, while everybody gasped when they saw the number, they didn't stop there. They went ahead and launched the station improvement project using federal and state funds, and they upgraded the stations in Old Fort, which today is a real estate office as well as a museum, because what they said is, train's going to be there once or twice a day. What are you going to do with the other 22 hours of a 24-hour day? And you had to come up with a plan for that money, showing them what you would do, what you would use the station for. So Old Fort, it was what it is today, a business as well as a museum. Marion is where the Marion Business Association has its offices. And by the way, Freddie Kelo, who's the director, executive director of the Marion Business Association, she's the secretary-treasurer, because she's an economic development person, the secretary-treasurer of the Western North Carolina Rail Committee. In Salisbury, have you been to Salisbury and seen the station, that $2 million station rebuild, which they have just doing another rebuild of? It is one of the most, they use it for all sorts of venues, for weddings, for receptions, it is magnificent, just beautiful, and it's a viable improvement. What Asheville did is bought a piece of land in the Biltmore, over near the Biltmore station there, which today now is landlocked. So I don't know what they're going to do with it. In Statesville, they did a renovation of theirs, which is now the Statesville Police Department. It was the Chamber of Commerce at first, now it's the Statesville Police Department. But these were the uses, and what you're looking at there is Morganton. That is an art museum, and the little museum in there which tells the story of Morganton's rail service. But they took a rundown, shabby section of Morganton, and if you get down there now, stop by that station. It's really attractive, and what it caused was a serious redevelopment in that area. Went from a slummy old industrial area to very nice restaurants and other shops in and around that. So between 2001 and 2015, these were the investments that we were making in it. In 2017, there were a group of us that were saying, look, we have a bunch of rail fans that have kind of stayed with the organization for a long time, with the old chamber organization, but we need economic development people, because if you're not going to make money off having a railroad in your community, and I don't care if it's freight, I don't care if it's passenger, I don't care if it's tourism, if it isn't going to make money, you're not going to get a train, period. And so what can we do to bring together civic leaders, economic development folks, chamber people? The Asheville Chamber is still a member. They have their vice president is a member of our Western North Carolina Rail Committee. But in 2017, in September of 2017, we staged Railroads and Economic Development in Western North Carolina, a conference. We brought CSX people in. We brought in folks from Norfolk Southern. We brought in the watcO folks who were considering buying this line here at the time. We brought in 4 legislators, and I'm going to mention John Torbett, who was chair of Transportation Appropriation at the time. He came, and he was one of our, and has stayed with us as one of our loyal supporters. He's now one of the big chairs of appropriation and less interested in rail, but I can always call John. And I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican. I have great respect for him, and I know when John says something, I can take it to the bank. I don't think about what did he mean by that. He says he'll support you, and in the end, he does. And to me, there's my editorial. We have got to get back to that where we work together. The ideologues have taken over on both sides, and they're running our parties into the ground. Okay, that's my editorial. In any event, we held this conference, and one of the recommendations of this conference was for our committee to incorporate and be very intentional about the people that we invited to be participants in it. And so we did, and we have we did. Steve Little is an attorney he's not only mayor of Marion, but he's an attorney, has a very successful law practice in Marion. He did the Articles of Incorporation. We approved them in 2018. And here's the mission. Very simple. You've heard me say it before. We want to improve and expand freight rail services. Why? Because the backbone of a passenger system is a freight rail system. They tear up all the tracks, folks. You know, you're just going to tilt at windmills trying to get passenger service started. And it's as simple as that. Secondly, enhancing the excursion trains. We want to restore, and we're negotiating. We're not having success with it, but we're negotiating with Norfolk Southern and CSX to restore excursion trains. And you used to have them come through here, and you know that, you know, they fill up in a matter of hours. I mean, it's not a matter of, you know, how long did it take to promote that? You announce it, and within a day or two, you've got your train filled up. People want to ride into these mountains to and through them. And so we want to enhance the excursion trains, and we want to encourage railroads such as the Great Smoky Mountain Railway. And that's it. And reestablish the passenger rail connection. That's the mission and purpose of the Western North Carolina Rail Committee. So when watcO came to town, this is watcO Blue, or Blue Ridge Southern is what you know it as. You know, we were and they have become this year a member of the Western North Carolina Rail Committee as well. You can talk about railroads all you want, but if they ain't sitting at the table, you know, you're tilting at windmills. Well, Blue Ridge Southern, Chase Gano is the representative for them, who he's the regional marketing director for watcO Blue. What did they do? They bought the line from Asheville out to Sylva through Canton. Their primary customer is Evergreen Packaging, the old Champion plant. That's why, it's not accidental, the old Canton Depot is their headquarters. And every time that Evergreen hiccups, you know, they're right there to, you know, offer a palliative with Evergreen that I think is important. But they just did one thing that it upset me. It's a bad news, good news thing. They sold the line that they owned between Hendersonville, and by the way, they owned to just up the track here to where they... Yeah, right, where just at the other side of to Tuxedo, and you'll see a lot of stored box cars and other cars there. They get money. They make money off that. If they store them, you know, they make bucks off it, and that's what, as far as they come now. And clearly Norfolk Southern still owns this, and they keep telling me, and I've asked them a number of times, what are you going to do with this track? What the big thing, by the way, Norfolk Southern is concerned about right now, you got people that are down here tearing up this track and selling it for scrap. They know who they are. And there's some people who are going to be embarrassed by that, but I was with them talking with their security person about 3 months ago, and anyway, it's amazing to me. The signal block down here on the mountain was stolen, and people think, well, they're not paying attention. Oh, they're paying attention, just so you know. Anyway, but you got Blue Ridge Southern. They sold the line. It's basically the rails to trails. The Ecusta Trail is what they're going to call it. 19 miles. Blue Ridge sold it for $16 million. They've gotten grants, part of grants, and some other things, so that will be converted from rails to trails. And there's always a provision, folks, they put in there. If a big industry were to come in, you know, it could revert to the railroad. That very rarely does that ever occur. I think, but my son-in-law, for example, and my daughter, who are runners, they're just excited that they're going to be able to run from West Hendersonville into downtown, following the track and not having to run in traffic and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of excitement. So The bad news is freight rail service is done. When they bought the line, some of the economic development folks at the time, particularly in Transylvania, said, we're working on plants that'll use your service. Well, it never materialized, and so they've sold it, and it's rails to trails. But that's Blue Ridge Southern. That is the newest railroad, started out here in 2015 here and it's owned by watcO. And let me get here. This is a picture of the Craggy Mountain Line. This is also what we're encouraging, the development of these kinds of activities. And if you haven't taken that ride, it's a sweet little ride. It really is. And the folks that run it they're almost all, with the exception of Rocky, they're all volunteers who run that. And we've talked about the Great Smoky Mountain Railway. The word I got from David Huskins today is they expect to open tomorrow or Sunday, reopen the line between Bryson City and the Nantahala Gorge. Right now, they're just running Bryson City to Dillsboro. This is my most notable failure. Now, I just told you what happened to the line between Hendersonville and Brevard. I had a fellow from Pisgah Forest who had a friend who owns a pedal car line out in the state of Washington on one of the old logging railroads, who he brought to our Western North Carolina Rail Committee, and we set up negotiations between him and the Blue Ridge Southern folks. And it was to set up a pedal car line that would probably run from Hendersonville to Etowah, or Etowah to Brevard. I mean, they were looking at the whole line where they were going to have to do the least amount of track repair. They never could reach an agreement. And I just still love this. They have these up in upstate New York and out in the state of Washington. Some are motorized, others are the pedal cars, and I thought that would be so neat between Brevard and Hendersonville to have that. The deal fell through. The old thing that always comes up with a railroad, insurance issues were, liability, and what this guy was willing to pay, because they wanted to sell him the line. He didn't want to buy the line. He just wanted to lease it. And so that whole thing fell apart. But this was part of one of the economic development initiatives we were pushing with the Western North Carolina Rail Committee. Now, when do I think it's feasible to get passenger service restored between Salisbury and Asheville? 2030 is probably a reasonable number. However, you need to know that as we're sitting here tonight, there is a study going on by the North Carolina Rail Division looking at projected ridership totals that they could anticipate for the first 3 to 5 years of service, if there were train service available to connect with the main line in Salisbury. That would be the key. And it would be start out with one train a day in each direction. This would be the kind of engine, the City of Salisbury engine, that would be used. It would be a North Carolina DOT train. It would not be an Amtrak train. It would be an NCDOT train. But here are the challenges we have today. You provide this service, it has to be fast, it has to be frequent, it has to be reliable, it has to be affordable, and for whoever the sponsoring organization, if it's the state, it's at least got to break even. If you get a private organization involved, or you get Amtrak involved now, they want to see, can it be profitable? And if it doesn't meet these criteria, folks, then I always remember talking to our former congressman from years ago, Congressman James McClure Clark, Jamie Clark from over in Fairview. And I still remember this. We were talking about train service to Asheville. He said, oh, that'd be nice. He said, a lot of times I'd miss the train when it left Asheville, but I never had to worry because I'd drive old for it, and by the time it got down the loops, I had to sit there and wait for it. And I thought, this is not the way to promote passenger rail service. If you're not going to make it quick and convenient and affordable, it isn't going to happen. So one of the things that we thought, how are we going to gauge whether this is feasible or not? Well, folks, here's the deal. The other deal, I got to tell you, fell through. And this is a good news, bad news story. We had negotiated with John Torbett, who was chair of the House Transportation Appropriations Committee. I had John at our conference. I had him out here on several occasions. We met with him and Dan Gurley. We had $880,000 committed in last year's budget for the inauguration of Amtrak Thruway bus service between Asheville and Salisbury to connect with the Carolinian and the Piedmont, and one of the Piedmont trains. And the deal was set, and I'm going to tell the whole story, till Michelle Presno, she's the Republican who beat me back in, when did I lose, 2012? She found out that I was chair of the Western North Carolina Rail Committee. And she's got a bug, and she submarined it. She accused the speaker of being a rhino for supporting this, and because I was chair of this committee, and she sent out email blasts. She was vicious. And the speaker, you know, he was, honestly, he was very apologetic to me, and I understood he was put in an impossible position, and so they pulled this appropriation from last year's budget, and so we didn't get the start. We were ready for the launch of the Amtrak bus service, and we would have had it. That's the bad news. The good news is, had we launched this service in the midst of the pandemic, because that was a 2-year appropriation, the numbers would have been abysmal, and it would have been even harder to get a full appropriation for the continuation of this service. But what we agreed with the rail division, the reason we were trying to get it is, let's build ridership, people getting used to making the connection, because you buy one ticket, and this is not a Greyhound bus. These are nice buses, and you buy your ticket from Amtrak from the time you get on in Asheville, or one of Marion, Morganton, Statesville. Those are the stops. You buy the one ticket, and it's wherever you're going, on the Amtrak system. So you didn't have to, I got to buy a bus ticket, and then I got to buy, all integrated into Amtrak system. So that fell apart, but, the rail division is still with us. They're doing a current study now to determine projected rail ridership. And, whoops, wrong way again. And this is this is basically, in green up here, is what they're proposing for the service. And you can go to the North Carolina DOT website, Rail Division website. They've got this map up there with their assessments to date. And they what they want, though, and this is the East and the West we have kind of joined together. They want to have, the East has Amtrak Thruway bus service to Wilmington. And they connect with the main line, north and south, right now. They want to have a dedicated train between Wilmington and the main line in the east near Fayetteville, or up through Pembroke, rather. And so that's service that they want to start, because they got bus service now. They also have Amtrak bus service to Morehead City. They're servicing the Marine base there. And but they want a dedicated train for the folks from Wilmington to Pembroke, and they want it for us from Salisbury to Asheville. They're committed to it. And I want to tell you, Jason Orthner is the director of the North Carolina Rail Division, and he is as fine a person as you'll ever deal with. And again, he's the kind of person, if he tells you something, you don't have to say, I wonder what he meant by that. He's straightforward and a good guy, and he's going to help us get what we want. So we know Amtrak, these are their projections. 2030, that's in print on their maps. Salisbury to Asheville, they want it by 2030. Today's 2021, right? 9 years out. And that's not our projection, that's Amtrak's projection. The other one they talk about, or they mention, is, which I'm really interested in, but I can tell you the rail division is not interested in it. And Jason has been really upfront with me on that, is, reopening Saluda. The safety issue overwhelms his engineers, and they just, they have a real issue with that. That's all I have to say.